She thought she could get away with it. A flight attendant mocked a first-class passenger, smirking as if she held all the power. But within minutes, everything changed. She had no idea who she was dealing with, and by the time she realized, it was already too late. Before we start the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. The airport was buzzing with the usual chaos of passengers rushing to their gates, the hum of announcements echoing through the terminal. Among them, Naomi Carter adjusted the strap of her designer handbag as she walked toward the boarding gate. She was dressed in a sleek navy blazer, matching trousers, and a pair of low heels. Everything about her presence exuded quiet confidence. She was used to traveling, and first class was nothing new to her. In one hand, she held her phone, scrolling through last-minute emails before takeoff, and in the other she carried her first-class boarding pass. The flight was a quick trip for business, nothing out of the ordinary, or so she thought. At the gate, a line had already formed as passengers waited to board. Jessica Reed, a blonde-haired flight attendant in her late 30s, stood at the entrance, scanning tickets with a polite but robotic smile. Her uniform was crisp, her name tag slightly tilted, and she carried herself with the kind of confidence that came from years of experience. As Naomi stepped forward, offering her pass with a casual nod, Jessica barely glanced at it before tilting her head slightly. "Are you sure you're in the right line?" Jessica asked, her lips curling into a smirk. Her voice wasn't particularly loud, but it carried just enough weight for those nearby to hear. Naomi raised an eyebrow, not in the mood for nonsense. "I'm exactly where I need to be," she replied smoothly, tapping the ticket in Jessica's hand. Jessica sighed, scanning the pass with exaggerated slowness. The machine beeped, confirming the seat. But instead of letting her through, Jessica held onto the ticket. She squinted at the small screen as if something was wrong. "Huh. First class?" Jessica muttered, more to herself than anyone else. Then she looked up again, this time with a smirk. "Must be nice." Naomi's eyes narrowed. She had encountered this kind of behavior before. Subtle, laced with condescension, disguised as casual conversation. It was the tone people used when they wanted to question whether she belonged somewhere without actually saying it outright. A few people in line shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension, but no one spoke up. David Monroe, a lawyer in his mid-40s with salt and pepper hair, watched the exchange carefully. He had been waiting in line behind Naomi, silently observing, his grip tightening on the handle of his briefcase. Clearing her throat, Naomi kept her voice calm. "Are we done here?" Jessica hesitated, her smirk faltering for just a moment before she let out a dramatic sigh and handed back the boarding pass. "Of course," she said, her voice sweet but insincere. "Enjoy your flight." Naomi didn't miss the way Jessica's eyes lingered on her as she walked past, or the way another flight attendant, Lauren, whispered something before they both laughed. It was a game to them, one they thought they could play without consequences. But Naomi Carter wasn't the type to let things slide, and Jessica Reed had no idea who she was dealing with. As Naomi stepped onto the jet bridge, she took a deep breath, forcing herself to shake off the irritation bubbling inside her. She had dealt with people like Jessica before, the ones who assumed things about her before knowing a single detail. It wasn't the first time, and unfortunately, it wouldn't be the last. Still, something about the way Jessica had smirked made Naomi's stomach tighten with frustration. She wasn't just questioning her ticket, she was questioning whether Naomi belonged in first class at all. She walked into the first-class cabin, her eyes scanning the rows of spacious seats. A flight attendant named Ryan, a younger man with a friendly smile, greeted her. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Carter. Can I help you with anything?" Naomi nodded slightly, handing him her coat. "Just this, thank you." She settled into her seat, 3A, adjusting the headrest while placing her handbag beside her. The cabin was quiet, filled mostly with business travelers absorbed in their laptops or reading through documents. She took out her phone and sent a quick text to her assistant, confirming her arrival time for the meeting after landing. Just as she placed her phone on the tray table, she heard footsteps approaching. The voice was familiar. "Oh!" Jessica's voice rang out, laced with fake politeness. "You again?" Naomi turned her head slightly, already bracing herself. Jessica stood beside her seat, holding a tray with pre-departure drinks, but her expression didn't match the warm hospitality expected from a flight attendant. "I just wanted to double-check something," Jessica continued, shifting her weight slightly. "Can I see your boarding pass again?" A murmur passed through the cabin. The man sitting in 3B, an older executive named Richard, looked up from his newspaper, his brow furrowing at the unusual request. Naomi folded her arms, her voice calm but firm. "You already checked it at the gate." Jessica let out a short laugh. "Right, but sometimes mistakes happen. I'd hate for there to be any confusion later." Naomi exhaled slowly, her patience running thin. She knew exactly what was happening. Jessica had seen her take this seat and had decided to push the issue further, hoping to intimidate her into justifying her presence again. But before Naomi could respond, a voice interrupted. "I'll save you the trouble," David Monroe, the lawyer from earlier, called out from seat 4C. His tone was sharp, his eyes locked onto Jessica. "I saw you check her pass back at the gate, and I just saw you ask again. Mind telling us why?" Jessica stiffened, clearly caught off guard. Her smile wavered. "It's just a routine check, sir." David set down his briefcase and leaned forward slightly. "Funny, I've been flying first class for over a decade, and I've never had my pass checked twice." He turned toward Naomi. "Have you?" Naomi gave a small, knowing smile. "No, I haven't." Jessica's face turned red. She glanced around, realizing that the passengers were paying attention now. Richard from seat 3B shook his head disapprovingly and muttered something under his breath. The quiet murmur in the cabin grew, and for the first time Jessica seemed uncomfortable. Ryan, the younger flight attendant, walked past and paused mid-step, sensing the shift in atmosphere. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice neutral but firm. Jessica quickly shook her head, her fingers tightening around the tray she was holding. "No problem at all." She turned back to Naomi, her lips pressed together. "Enjoy your flight." With that, she spun on her heel and walked briskly toward the galley. David leaned back in his seat and picked up his newspaper again. "That was interesting," he muttered, just loud enough for Naomi to hear. Naomi smiled slightly, glancing at Jessica's retreating figure. Something told her this wasn't over yet. Jessica stormed into the galley, her jaw clenched as she set down the tray with more force than necessary. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for a glass of water, taking a quick sip to steady herself. She had been working this job for years and never, not once, had a passenger called her out like that in front of everyone. She could still hear David's voice in her head, questioning her actions, making her look foolish. And then there was Naomi, sitting there all smug, acting like she owned the place. Jessica knew what she had been doing, pushing Naomi, making her uncomfortable, but she hadn't expected the other passengers to pay attention. That lawyer had made it clear he wasn't going to let her get away with it. Jessica exhaled, forcing herself to smile as her colleague Lauren walked into the galley, holding a clipboard. "What's with you?" Lauren asked, raising an eyebrow as she grabbed a water bottle from the fridge. "Nothing," Jessica muttered, but the tension in her voice made it obvious she was still rattled. Lauren smirked. "That didn't look like nothing. I saw you messing with that woman in 3A. What is your deal?" Jessica rolled her eyes. She just had an attitude. People like that always do when they think they're important. Lauren let out a short laugh, shaking her head. "You know, maybe it's not her. Maybe you're just mad you got called out for no reason." Jessica turned sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" Lauren shrugged, leaning against the counter. "I mean, you do this sometimes. You see someone and just decide they don't belong. Maybe you should learn when to quit." Jessica scoffed. "Oh, please, like you don't judge people too." Lauren gave her a knowing look, but didn't respond. Instead, she pulled out the passenger manifest and glanced at Naomi's name. Her eyes widened slightly as she read the details next to it. Jessica noticed. "What?" Lauren hesitated for a second before tapping Naomi's name on the list. "Did you even bother to check this before making a scene?" Jessica frowned and leaned over to read the information. Her stomach dropped the second she saw it. Naomi Carter, corporate partner, frequent first-class traveler, VIP status. Jessica's mouth went dry. Corporate partner? That meant Naomi was connected to the airline at a high level. Not just some random passenger, but someone who probably had influence over how things operated. Lauren chuckled under her breath. shaking her head. Oh, you really screwed up. Jessica swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the counter. She had thought Naomi was just another first-class passenger, someone she could subtly push around without any real consequences. But now the realization was hitting her like a freight train. This wasn't just a mistake. This could cost her everything. And worst of all, Naomi hadn't even played that card yet. That meant she was waiting, and Jessica had no idea what was coming next. Jessica's pulse quickened as she stared at Naomi's name on the manifest. The words corporate partner burned in her mind. This wasn't some everyday passenger she could brush off. This woman had connections, real ones. People like her had the kind of influence that didn't just get complaints heard, they got results. Lauren leaned closer, lowering her voice. You know she could have you written up for this, right? Maybe worse. Jessica clenched her jaw, trying to keep her expression neutral, but her stomach churned. She had been in hot water with the airline before. Nothing major, just a few complaints here and there from passengers who had called her rude. But nothing had ever stuck because no one had ever pushed hard enough. But Naomi had barely reacted, which meant she was waiting, letting things unfold, watching. Jessica ran a hand through her hair, trying to shake the feeling of unease. It's fine, she muttered. She didn't say anything. If she was going to complain, she would have done it already. Lauren gave her a long look, then sighed. You really don't get it, do you? She tapped the passenger list again. People like her don't throw a fit. They don't argue. They just make one call, and suddenly someone like you is out of a job. Jessica felt her throat go dry. That wasn't going to happen. She wasn't going to let some entitled woman get her fired over a harmless comment. Straightening her uniform, she forced a smirk. I can handle her. Lauren didn't respond right away. Instead, she pulled her headset from her pocket and clicked it on. Well, good luck with that, she muttered before stepping out of the galley and back into the cabin. Jessica took a slow breath, steadying herself. She wasn't going to panic over this. She would just lay low, do her job, and keep her distance from Naomi for the rest of the flight. No more comments, no more glances, nothing. She reached for her notepad to check the drink orders for first class. But just as she turned, the intercom beeped. A smooth, professional voice filled the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're finishing up our pre-flight checks and we'll be ready for departure shortly. Flight attendants, please complete your final preparations. Jessica exhaled in relief, hoping this flight would go by quickly. But as she stepped out of the galley, her eyes landed on Naomi, sitting calmly in her seat, scrolling through her phone. Then, as if she could feel Jessica's gaze, Naomi slowly looked up. For a moment, they locked eyes. Naomi smiled. It wasn't smug. It wasn't gloating. It was the kind of quiet confidence that made Jessica's stomach churn with uncertainty. Because that smile, that was the look of a woman who knew she was about to win. Jessica quickly looked away, pretending to focus on adjusting a nearby passenger's tray table, but her mind raced. That smile from Naomi, it wasn't just polite. It was deliberate, controlled. It was the kind of smile that said, I know exactly what I'm doing. And that was what scared Jessica the most. She turned back toward the galley, hoping to avoid Naomi for the remainder of the flight. But before she could take another step, she heard a voice behind her. Excuse me. Jessica's stomach twisted as she turned around. David Monroe, the lawyer from earlier, stood next to his seat, his expression unreadable. Yes, sir, she answered, keeping her voice neutral. David glanced toward Naomi for a second before looking back at Jessica. I just want to clarify something. Is it standard procedure for flight attendants to check a first-class passenger's boarding pass twice? Or was that just a special case? Jessica forced a tight-lipped smile, her fingers tightening around the tray she was holding. Sir, I was just ensuring everything was in order. David nodded slowly, studying her. Right, because I've been flying for years, and I can't recall a time when my boarding pass was questioned at all, let alone twice. So I'm just curious, what exactly was the issue? Jessica felt her face grow warm. Several other passengers in first class were now looking in their direction, some pretending not to listen, others watching openly. Even Ryan, the younger flight attendant, had stopped what he was doing to observe. There was no issue, Jessica said quickly, forcing another smile. Just a simple verification? David let out a short laugh, shaking his head. That's interesting, because from where I was standing, it looked a lot like you were doubting whether Miss Carter belonged here. A murmur spread through the cabin. Jessica's heart pounded. Naomi didn't say a word. She simply leaned back in her seat, watching the interaction unfold. Jessica felt the pressure closing in on her, but she couldn't let this get out of hand. She straightened her posture. Sir, I was simply following procedure. I assure you there was no— Before she could finish, the intercom beeped again. Cabin crew, prepare for takeoff. Jessica saw this as her way out. Please return to your seats, sir. We'll be taking off shortly. David didn't argue. He gave her one last look before nodding and settling back into his seat. Jessica took the opportunity to retreat, moving quickly toward the front of the cabin. She needed to calm down, to pull herself together. But as she passed Naomi, she caught something out of the corner of her eye. Naomi had just sent a text message. Jessica didn't know who it was too, but a gnawing feeling in her stomach told her that she wasn't going to like what happened next. Jessica's nerves were unraveling, but she refused to let it show. She took a deep breath as she entered the galley, pressing her palms against the cold metal counter. She just needed to get through the flight without another incident. That was it. Keep her head down, do her job, and ignore Naomi. But that text. She couldn't get it out of her mind. Who had Naomi messaged? The airline? A friend? A lawyer? Jessica didn't know, and that uncertainty made her uneasy. Naomi hadn't snapped, hadn't raised her voice, hadn't made a scene. And that was exactly what made her dangerous. The way she just sat there, completely in control. It sent a clear message. I don't have to argue. I don't have to fight, because I've already won. Jessica felt a chill run down her spine. Are you seriously shaking? Jessica turned to see Lauren standing there, watching her with an amused expression. Jessica scoffed, crossing her arms. I am not shaking, Lauren smirked. You look like you've seen a ghost. Jessica rolled her eyes and grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge. Drop it, okay? Everything is fine. Lauren chuckled, leaning against the counter. Sure, totally fine. Except, you pissed off the wrong person. Jessica ignored her and took a sip of water, but the bottle shook slightly in her grip. Lauren folded her arms, lowering her voice. Look, I don't care what happens to you, but if I were you, I'd start thinking about what I'm going to say when this blows up, because it will blow up. Jessica set the bottle down, gripping the counter tighter. She refused to believe this was spiraling into something bigger. It was a misunderstanding, nothing more. Naomi wasn't going to do anything, right? Before she could respond, the intercom chimed again. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're reaching our cruising altitude and we expect a smooth flight ahead. Jessica let out a slow breath, relieved that takeoff was over. Maybe now everything would settle down. But just as she started to relax, her worst fear happened. The in-flight phone buzzed. Jessica and Lauren both turned toward it. The red light flashed, signaling a direct call from the cockpit. Jessica hesitated. This couldn't be about her, right? Lauren arched an eyebrow. Well, aren't you going to answer? Jessica swallowed hard and picked up the receiver. Yes, Captain? The voice on the other end was firm, too firm. Jessica, we just received a direct message from the airline's corporate office. There's been a formal complaint regarding a first-class passenger's treatment at boarding. I need a full explanation. Now. Jessica froze. Corporate office. Formal complaint. It had already started. She turned slightly, glancing toward the cabin, and sure enough, Naomi was still seated calmly, scrolling through her phone. Jessica's stomach dropped. This wasn't just an irritated passenger. This wasn't just a minor complaint. This was something much, much bigger. The call wasn't just about what had already happened. It was a warning, and Jessica had no idea how much worse it was going to get. Jessica's grip on the phone tightened as the captain's voice remained firm on the other end of the line. I'm waiting, Jessica, he said, his tone leaving no room for excuses. Her throat felt dry. She needed time to think, to come up with a way to explain herself, but time wasn't on her side. Naomi had already made her move. Captain, I was just following standard procedures, Jessica said quickly, forcing her voice to remain steady. I checked her ticket at the gate, but I thought I might have made a mistake, so I asked to verify again in first class. It wasn't personal, just a routine check. There was silence on the other end, followed by a long sigh. Jessica, the captain said, slower this time. You do realize who this passenger is, don't you? Jessica swallowed hard. She could lie. She could say she hadn't known about Naomi's corporate status. But she had already seen it on the manifest. And if the airline was investigating, they would know she had access to that information before the flight even began. She hesitated for a second too long. That's what I thought, the captain said before she could respond. His voice was colder now. We can't afford this kind of mistake, especially not with her. The corporate office has already flagged this as a priority issue. Jessica felt a wave of nausea hit her. A priority issue? That meant the complaint had gone straight up the chain, bypassing the usual customer service channels. That only happened when a high-profile passenger was involved, or when someone's job was on the line. Understood, Captain, she said quickly. I'll make sure she has everything she needs. Another pause. Oh, you'll do more than that, the captain finally said. The airline's executive team is already reviewing the situation. If they decide this was an act of discrimination, there won't be a discussion, Jessica. There will only be a termination. Jessica's chest tightened painfully. Termination. She had thought she could brush this off, that Naomi would just roll her eyes and move on. She had assumed she had the upper hand. But Naomi had never argued, never shouted, never made a scene. Instead, she had done something far worse. She had gone straight to the top. The phone clicked, and the call ended. Jessica lowered the receiver slowly, her fingers trembling. Lauren was still standing there, arms crossed, having heard just enough to put the pieces together. So, she said, raising an eyebrow, how's that plan of yours working out? Jessica shot her a glare, but couldn't find the words to respond. She turned back to the counter, gripping the edge to steady herself. She needed to fix this. Now, before she could talk herself out of it, Jessica grabbed a tray of drinks and made her way back into the first-class cabin. She forced a bright, professional smile, but her hands were sweating as she approached Naomi's seat. The calm expression on Naomi's face hadn't changed. She still held all the power in this moment. Jessica cleared her throat and set a glass of champagne down on Naomi's tray table. Miss Carter, she said, her voice too chipper, too forced. I just wanted to personally apologize for any misunderstanding earlier. If there's anything I can do to make your flight more comfortable, please don't hesitate to ask. Naomi slowly looked up from her phone, tilting her head slightly. Jessica tried to hold eye contact, but something about the way Naomi studied her made her shift uncomfortably. For a moment, Naomi said nothing. Then finally, she smiled again, that same controlled, knowing smile that had made Jessica uneasy before. That's very kind of you, Naomi said smoothly, but I already have everything I need. Jessica faltered. She had expected anger, maybe even a sharp remark, but Naomi's calm, measured response felt so much worse. It was dismissive. It was the kind of response that meant she wasn't just accepting an apology, she was letting Jessica dig her own grave. Jessica nodded stiffly. Of course. Let me know if that changes. She turned to leave, but before she could take a single step, David Monroe's voice cut through the silence again. Strange, he said casually from a few seats away. I don't think I saw you personally apologizing to anyone else. Just her. Jessica's stomach dropped. The murmurs in the cabin grew louder again. She saw Richard in 3B watching the interaction closely. Ryan, the other flight attendant, was listening too. Naomi finally set her phone down on the tray table, locking eyes with Jessica. I suppose that is strange, Naomi said lightly, tapping a manicured finger against the armrest. It's almost as if she suddenly realized she made a mistake. Jessica's entire body heated with embarrassment. She wanted to escape, but she was frozen. Naomi didn't need to call her out directly. The entire first-class cabin already knew. And worse, so did the airline's executives. Jessica realized something terrifying at that moment. She had already lost. She just didn't know how bad the fallout was going to be. Jessica turned sharply, forcing her feet to move back toward the galley as the weight of the first-class cabin's silent judgment pressed down on her. Every step felt heavier, her throat tightening as she heard the hushed whispers trailing behind her. She had always prided herself on control, Control over the passengers, control over how she carried herself, control over how people saw her. But not this time. This time, Naomi controlled the room. By the time Jessica reached the galley, her hands were clammy, her breath shallow. She gripped the counter, willing herself to calm down, to think. Maybe, just maybe, she could fix this. Lauren was still there, sipping on a cup of coffee as she watched Jessica struggle to pull herself together. She let out a slow whistle, shaking her head. "Wow," Lauren muttered, setting her cup down. "That was brutal." Jessica shot her a glare. "Not helping." Lauren smirked. "Not trying to." Jessica exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. "I just need to get through the rest of the flight," she muttered. "Once we land, this will all blow over." Lauren gave her a long, pointed look. "Blow over?" She let out a dry laugh. "Are you serious? Did you not just hear what the captain said?" Jessica stiffened. She didn't want to hear it, but Lauren wasn't about to let it go. "You're not just in trouble, Jessica. You're being watched, right now, in real time, by the airline's executive team." She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "You're past the point of hoping this blows over." Jessica gritted her teeth, panic starting to creep in. "So what am I supposed to do? Beg her for forgiveness?" Lauren shrugged. "Not my problem, but you better figure something out before we land. Because if I were you, I'd be worried about who's waiting at the gate." Jessica's stomach twisted at those words. She knew what that meant. If the executives were already watching, if they had already flagged this as a priority, that meant they weren't going to wait for a standard complaint to be filed. Someone was waiting for her the moment this plane touched down. Jessica had worked for the airline for nearly a decade, but she had seen it happen before. A flight attendant would step off a flight, expecting to go about their usual routine, only to be greeted by a supervisor with a clipboard and a security officer standing by. And when that happened, there was no negotiation. Jessica refused to let that happen to her. She took a deep breath and made a decision. If Naomi wanted to play this game, fine. But Jessica wasn't about to go down without trying to control the narrative. Grabbing her notepad, she pulled out a pen and started writing. "What are you doing?" Lauren asked, raising an eyebrow. Jessica didn't look up. "Covering myself," Lauren scoffed. "Oh, this ought to be good." Jessica ignored her and kept writing, carefully crafting her version of events. She detailed how she had simply been following protocol, how Naomi had seemed aggressive, how she had escalated things unnecessarily. If she could twist the story just enough, maybe she could get ahead of the complaint. Maybe she could make it seem like Naomi had been the difficult one. But just as she was finishing, the in-flight phone buzzed again. Jessica flinched, her pulse spiking. She knew who it was before she even picked up the receiver. She hesitated, then lifted the phone to her ear. "This is Jessica." The voice on the other end was not the captain. It was the head flight supervisor, someone she never spoke to directly unless it was serious. "Miss Reed," the voice said coolly, "upon arrival, you are to report directly to gate operations. You are not to leave the airport without checking in first. Do you understand?" Jessica's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a possible complaint. This was already decided. She gripped the phone tighter, trying to control the panic rising in her throat. I understand." The line went dead. She set the phone down slowly, her hands trembling. Lauren, who had heard everything, let out a low whistle. "Well," she said, shaking her head, "looks like the decision's already been made for you." Jessica couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Naomi hadn't yelled. She hadn't demanded anything. She had just waited. And now? Jessica wasn't just losing the game. She was about to be completely erased from the board. Jessica's hands clenched into fists as she stared at the in-flight phone, its silent presence feeling like a death sentence. Gate operations. That wasn't a warning. It was an order. She wasn't being asked to explain herself. She was being told where to go before they made their decision official. Her heart pounded in her chest. This was happening too fast. She had thought she had time, a chance to smooth things over, maybe even convince someone that Naomi had been overreacting. But the airline had already made its move. Jessica wasn't leaving this flight as a flight attendant. She was leaving as a problem to be dealt with. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to think, to strategize, but for the first time in her career, there was no way to talk her way out of this. Because this wasn't about a single mistake. This was about the pattern, the previous complaints, the passengers she had quietly dismissed before, the comments she thought no one would ever take seriously. Jessica had always assumed that as long as she wasn't outright caught, as long as she kept her behavior subtle enough, nothing would ever happen. But Naomi wasn't just any passenger, and now Naomi was going to be the reason she lost everything. Lauren's voice pulled her out of her thoughts. "Jessica," she said, her tone softer now, almost pitying. "I don't think you get it. This isn't just about today." Jessica snapped her head up, her eyes flashing. "What's that supposed to mean?" Lauren let out a slow breath, folding her arms. "You think this is the first complaint they've gotten about you?" Jessica's face burned. "There have been complaints before," Lauren continued, her voice calm but firm. "You know it, and they didn't do anything because it wasn't worth the trouble. But this time, you targeted the wrong person?" Jessica shook her head furiously. "That's not true. I've cut the act, Jess." Lauren's voice hardened. "We've all seen it. The way you treat certain passengers. The way you go out of your way to make some of them uncomfortable." Jessica's stomach twisted painfully, but she refused to admit it. Not to Lauren, not to herself. "I was just following protocol," she insisted, her voice shaking. Lauren let out a dry laugh, shaking her head. "That's funny, because I've never seen you question a first-class passenger's ticket when they were a white businessman in a suit." Jessica flinched, her breath catching in her throat. Lauren's expression didn't change. "Face it, you got away with it before. But this time, you went after the wrong woman." Jessica turned away, staring at the flickering lights on the galley panel, but she could still feel the truth of Lauren's words pressing down on her. There was no out. No one was going to cover for her this time. Because Naomi hadn't just filed a complaint. Naomi had made sure the right people saw it. The first-class passengers had witnessed everything. David Monroe, the lawyer, had spoken up. The airline knew exactly what had happened. Not just today, but over time. Jessica had thought she could silence people by making them uncomfortable. Instead, she had silenced herself. The intercom beeped again, and Jessica barely registered the captain's announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning our descent shortly. Cabin crew, please prepare for landing." Jessica's hands gripped the counter as her reality sank in. This was it. The last flight she would ever work. The moment the wheels touched the ground, she wasn't a flight attendant anymore. She was the latest headline in a scandal the airline couldn't afford to ignore. And the worst part? She had done it to herself. Jessica had never felt turbulence like this before. Not from the plane, but inside her own chest. The aircraft was descending, the soft hum of the engines vibrating through the cabin, but she could barely focus. Every movement around her felt surreal, distant. She had spent years in control, dictating how passengers were treated, deciding who got smiles and who got scrutiny. And now, she was seconds away from losing everything. Her hands shook as she grabbed onto the edge of the counter, trying to steady her breathing. There was no turning back. The airline had already decided. The only thing left was the moment it all became real. A soft chime signaled the final descent. In first class, Naomi Carter sat calmly, sipping her water, unfazed by the approaching landing. Jessica's stomach twisted at the complete lack of concern on Naomi's face. She had already won, and she knew it. Jessica's mind raced for a way out. Maybe if she apologized one more time? Really apologized, not the fake forced smile she had given earlier. Maybe if she convinced Naomi to retract the complaint? Maybe if she... A firm hand landed on her shoulder. Jessica jumped and turned around. It was Ryan, the younger flight attendant. His usual easygoing demeanor was gone, replaced with something unreadable. "They're waiting for you," he said quietly. Jessica's blood ran cold. She didn't even have to ask who they were. Ryan let go of her shoulder, looking uncomfortable, like he didn't want to be involved but had no choice. "You need to go up front as soon as we land." Jessica barely nodded, her hands tightening into fists at her sides. The plane gave a slight jolt as the landing gear deployed. The captain's voice came over the intercom, giving the usual instructions for arrival. but it sounded distant to Jessica's ears. She had spent years watching passengers walk off flights, carefree, moving on with their lives. Now she was going to be the last one left on board. The wheels hit the runway. The plane slowed. Jessica forced herself to breathe, but the oxygen felt thick, suffocating. The moment the aircraft stopped at the gate, reality crashed down on her. The doors hadn't even opened yet, but she could already see them. Through the small gap in the curtain separating first class from the front exit, she spotted two uniformed employees standing just outside, clipboard in hand, stiff postures, serious expressions, and next to them, a security officer. Jessica's vision blurred for a second. She had seen this play out before, from a distance, when it wasn't her. She had watched other employees get escorted off planes, forced to answer for their actions. Now it was her turn. Passengers began unbuckling their seatbelts, stretching, collecting their belongings. For them, it was just another landing. For Jessica, it was her final flight. The doors opened and the first-class passengers began making their way toward the exit. Jessica watched as Naomi stood gracefully, unhurried, adjusting the strap of her handbag before pulling out her phone again. She didn't even look in Jessica's direction, because she didn't have to. She had done everything she needed to do. As Naomi stepped forward, David Monroe, the lawyer, fell in beside her. He muttered something under his breath, and Naomi gave a small, knowing smile. Jessica felt the weight of the world pressing down on her chest. She wanted to say something, anything. But before she could even open her mouth, Naomi walked past her without a glance. Jessica had never felt more invisible. As the passengers disappeared through the jet bridge, the uniformed employees waiting outside stepped inside the cabin. One of them, a woman with sharp features and a no-nonsense expression, locked eyes with Jessica. "Miss Reed," she said smoothly, flipping open her clipboard, "we need to have a conversation." Jessica's entire body went cold. This wasn't just a warning. This wasn't just a write-up. This was the end. And the worst part? Naomi Carter never had to raise her voice, demand attention, or cause a scene. She had simply waited, because power wasn't about being loud. It was about knowing exactly when to act, so that people like Jessica never saw it coming. Jessica's throat felt tight as she stared at the woman standing in front of her. She wasn't just some low-level supervisor here to file a report. Jessica could tell immediately. The way she stood, the clipboard in her hands, the security officer behind her, watching silently with arms crossed. It all meant one thing. This was serious. Lauren, who had been lingering near the galley, took a single step back, as if distancing herself from whatever was about to happen. Jessica forced herself to stand straight, to hold on to some sense of authority, but her legs felt like lead. The woman cleared her throat and adjusted the clipboard in her hands. "Miss Reed, my name is Angela Tate, Senior Compliance Officer with the airline's Customer Relations Division. As I'm sure you're aware, a formal complaint has been submitted regarding your treatment of a first-class passenger on this flight." Jessica opened her mouth, scrambling for something to say, but Angela continued, flipping a page on her clipboard. "We have already received multiple witness accounts, as well as a video recording of the incident at the gate." Jessica's stomach plummeted. Video. She hadn't even thought about that. David Monroe. He had been standing there the whole time, watching, recording. A bead of sweat formed at Jessica's temple. I can explain," she blurted out quickly. "I was just following protocol. I asked to check the boarding pass again because—" Angela lifted a hand, cutting her off. "Miss Reed, the passenger in question is a corporate partner and VIP member with our airline. She is one of our most valued clients. You were not following protocol. You were singling her out." Jessica's fingers curled into fists. "Furthermore," Angela continued, "this is not the first complaint we've received about your conduct with passengers." Jessica's lungs squeezed tight. She had always gotten away with it before. She had always been able to talk her way out of complaints, make it sound like a misunderstanding, or shift the blame onto a difficult passenger. Not this time. Not with a VIP. Not with a lawyer recording everything. Not with passengers speaking up. Angela took a deep breath. "Effective immediately, you are being placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation." Jessica's vision blurred at the edges. Administrative leave. That was just a polite way of saying she was already gone. Angela wasn't finished. We'll be reviewing your full employment record, including previous complaints. You will be contacted by HR regarding next steps. But given the nature of this complaint and the level of visibility it has received, I strongly advise that you seek legal representation. Jessica felt her knees locked to keep from falling over. This wasn't just about losing her job. If the airline was telling her to get a lawyer, that meant they were worried about a lawsuit. This was worse than she had imagined. She opened her mouth again, desperately trying to salvage herself. I swear I didn't mean anything by it. I was just... Angela's expression didn't change. Miss Reed, this conversation is not a negotiation. You will not be assigned to any further flights until the investigation is complete. She nodded toward the security officer, who took a single step forward. You'll need to turn over your badge and access credentials before leaving the airport today. Jessica stared at her in horror. Turn over her badge? She had been with the airline for nearly 10 years. She had thought she would be the one deciding when she left this job. Not like this. She heard a quiet shuffle from behind her. Lauren still watching. Her expression was unreadable, but Jessica could see the flicker of something close to pity. Angela extended her hand. Your badge, please. Jessica's pulse pounded in her ears. She wanted to argue. She wanted to fight, but she knew this was over. Her fingers shook as she reached for the small silver badge pinned to her uniform. The badge she had clipped on every single shift for years. The badge that had once made her feel powerful, untouchable. She unclipped it slowly, her breath catching as she placed it in Angela's outstretched hand. The weight of it leaving her fingers felt like her entire career slipping away. Angela took the badge, tucked it into her folder, then gave a small nod. You are free to collect your belongings and exit through the employee corridor. Jessica's head spun. Just like that? No more uniform. No more flights. No more job. She felt the stares from the remaining flight crew around her. Some were trying not to look, pretending to focus on their final duties. Others, like Ryan, made no attempt to hide the way their eyes followed her, as if watching the moment she lost everything. Angela turned toward the security officer and gestured for him to stand back. He wasn't escorting her out, yet. She still had to walk out on her own. The humiliation burned deep. She didn't look at Lauren. She didn't look at Ryan. And she especially didn't look in the direction of first class, where she knew Naomi Carter was likely walking off the plane right now unaware, or perhaps very aware, that she had set everything in motion. With her badge gone, Jessica felt bare. She turned slowly, moving toward the employee corridor, her body stiff, her hands clenched at her sides. She forced herself to keep her head up, to hold on to what little dignity she had left. But deep down, she knew. She had done this to herself. She had thought she was untouchable. She had ignored the warnings. She had mocked the wrong woman. And now, Jessica Reed was just another former employee. And Naomi Carter? Naomi had walked away without lifting a finger, because she had never needed to. She had let Jessica destroy herself. Jessica walked stiffly through the narrow employee corridor, every step feeling heavier than the last. The low hum of the airport's machinery buzzed faintly in the distance, but her ears still rang from the words Angela had spoken just minutes ago. Turn over your badge. You are being placed on administrative leave. Seek legal representation. Jessica's hands curled into tight fists at her sides. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She was supposed to have time to fix it, time to explain, but Naomi Carter had made sure she never had the chance. As she approached the employee exit, a small locker room came into view. She had used it hundreds of times before, a place where flight attendants stashed their belongings before takeoff, where they freshened up between long-haul flights, where she had laughed with colleagues about difficult passengers. Now it was where she would collect her things for the last time. The room was empty, a dull overhead light flickering as Jessica approached her locker. Her hands trembled as she twisted the lock open, pulling out her travel bag and uniform coat. The scent of disinfectant and faint perfume lingered in the air, but all Jessica could focus on was how quiet it was. She had never noticed it before, how the space always seemed to hum with chatter, movement, life. Now it was just her, alone. She slowly zipped up her bag, her mind racing through the what-ifs, the could-have-beens, the moments she had ignored. What if she had just scanned Naomi's ticket like any other? What if she hadn't let her own prejudices get in the way? What if she had simply let Naomi board without a second thought? Would she still have her job? Would she still have her power? She swallowed hard, shoving her bag onto her shoulder. As she turned toward the door, a shadow appeared in the doorway. Jessica froze. Lauren. Jessica exhaled sharply, already bracing herself for the conversation she didn't want to have. "What?" she muttered, shoving past her. Lauren didn't move, forcing Jessica to stop just before she reached the door. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Jessica clenched her jaw, waiting for Lauren to mock her, rub it in, say something sarcastic. But when Lauren finally spoke, her voice was calm. "You really thought you'd get away with it forever, didn't you?" Jessica's breath hitched. Her fingers dug into the strap of her bag as she turned her head slightly. "You don't know what you're talking about." Lauren gave a small chuckle, shaking her head. "I know exactly what I'm talking about." She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "I've worked with you for years, Jessica, and I've watched you do this same thing over and over. You always pick the passengers who won't fight back, the ones who will just take it and move on." Jessica stayed silent. Lauren sighed. "But this time, you picked the wrong person." Jessica's nails dug into her palm. "Naomi Carter didn't even have to argue with you," Lauren continued. "She didn't have to yell, didn't have to threaten you, because people like her?" She let out a dry laugh. "They don't fight, they just watch you destroy yourself." Jessica's chest tightened painfully. She wanted to lash out, to say something, anything, that would turn this conversation around. Instead, she swallowed the lump in her throat and forced her way past Lauren, stepping into the hallway. Lauren didn't stop her, but just as Jessica reached the exit, Lauren's voice rang out again. "You're lucky, you know," she said quietly. Jessica stiffened. Lauren tilted her head slightly. "Naomi could have done worse." Jessica's breath came out in a sharp, bitter laugh. "Worse?" She turned, eyes flashing. "She got me fired. What else could she have done?" Lauren's gaze hardened. "Oh, Jessica," she said, shaking her head. "You still don't get it." Jessica opened her mouth, but before she could speak, her phone buzzed. She hesitated, pulling it from her pocket. A text message. Her heart stopped. It wasn't from the airline. It wasn't from HR. It was from an unknown number. Jessica's fingers trembled as she tapped the message open. Unknown number. "I hope you're ready for what's next." Jessica's vision blurred. No name, no signature, just a single line that sent ice down her spine. She knew exactly who it was from. Jessica's fingers went numb as she turned back toward Lauren. Lauren just gave her a small, knowing smile. "Told you she could have done worse." Jessica's breath shuddered, because suddenly, getting fired didn't feel like the end of the story. It felt like the beginning of something much, much worse. Jessica's fingers hovered over the screen, her stomach twisting into knots. "I hope you're ready for what's next." Her pulse pounded in her ears. This wasn't just about losing her job. Naomi Carter wasn't finished with her. She swallowed hard, staring at the message, willing it to make sense. Would Naomi really go this far? Jessica had already lost everything. Wasn't that enough? She turned sharply, facing Lauren. "Did you tell her to send this?" Her voice was raw, barely controlled. Lauren scoffed, shaking her head. "Jessica, you really think I need to tell her anything? You did this all on your own." Jessica clenched her fists. "What does she want?" Lauren exhaled, tilting her head slightly. "That's the thing, Jess. You don't get to decide when this ends. She does." Jessica's stomach churned. For the first time in her life, she wasn't in control. She shoved the phone into her pocket, her body moving on autopilot as she turned toward the exit doors. She needed to get out of here. Get away from the airport, from Lauren, from this nightmare she had created. The doors hissed open, and she stepped into the employee parking lot. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows over the rows of cars. Jessica inhaled deeply, trying to calm the panic crawling up her throat. She needed to think. She needed to... "Miss Reed." Jessica froze. The voice was unfamiliar, but the tone was unmistakable, authoritative, controlled. Dangerous. She turned slowly, her breath catching as she saw two men in suits standing near the curb. One of them, a tall man with neatly combed hair, held a folder in his hand. The other, shorter with a firm posture, had a security badge clipped to his belt. Jessica's blood ran cold. They weren't airport employees, they were corporate. The taller man stepped forward, offering a tight, professional smile. "We need to have a word." Jessica's heartbeat skyrocketed. "I've already turned in my badge," she said quickly, her voice sharper than intended. "I've already spoken to compliance. What else do you people want from me?" The shorter man, the one with the security badge, glanced at the folder in his colleague's hands before speaking. "We're not from HR, Miss Reed. This isn't about your termination." Jessica's breath hitched. Her mind raced. If they weren't from HR, if this wasn't about the job, then "We're here on behalf of our legal department," the taller man interrupted smoothly, flipping open the folder. "A claim has been submitted against you, and we need to discuss your options before this escalates further." Jessica's vision swam. A claim? The words came out weak, almost distant. The man nodded, unfazed by her reaction. "Yes, a discrimination complaint has been filed against you with the intent to pursue legal action." Jessica's knees threatened to buckle. This wasn't just losing her job. This was about to follow her. She had assumed that once she walked away from the airline, Naomi Carter would let it go. She had thought the worst was over, but Naomi wasn't done. And now Jessica was about to lose more than just her career. The taller man continued, flipping through the papers in his hands. "You have the right to secure your own legal representation, but our company attorneys are recommending full cooperation. This will likely go to arbitration before any formal lawsuit, but given the nature of the evidence—" "Evidence?" Jessica choked out. The man barely blinked. "Yes, Miss Reed, we have multiple witness statements, security footage from the boarding gate, and of course," he tapped the folder lightly, "the video recorded by Mr. Monroe." Jessica felt the air leave her lungs. The video. David Monroe's video. It had all been captured. Her questioning Naomi. The smirk. The tone. The way she dropped the ticket. It wasn't just a story now. It was undeniable proof. Jessica's mouth went dry, panic clawing at her throat. This wasn't—" The man raised a hand. "Miss Reed, I strongly suggest you don't say anything else until you've spoken with legal counsel." Jessica's body locked up. This wasn't a conversation. This was a warning. She looked between the two men, her brain scrambling for a way out. But there wasn't one. She had mocked the wrong woman, and now Naomi Carter was making sure she paid for it. The taller man tucked the folder under his arm and pulled a small business card from his pocket. He handed it to Jessica, his voice cool and controlled. "Our legal team will be in contact soon. We suggest you prepare accordingly." Jessica stared at the card in her trembling hand. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. As the two men walked away, disappearing into the airport's main terminal, Jessica finally allowed herself to breathe. Her body felt numb, her mind reeling. The airline had cut her loose. But Naomi had buried her, because firing Jessica wasn't enough. Naomi Carter was going to make sure she never had power over another passenger again, and for the first time in her life, Jessica Reed had no way out. Jessica stood frozen in the parking lot, the small business card still clenched in her hand. The weight of the moment bore down on her like an avalanche, crushing, suffocating. This wasn't just about losing her job anymore. This was about losing everything. Her career, her reputation, her future. She forced herself to take a shaky breath, her fingers tightening around the card as she read the embossed letters. Corporate Legal Division, Airline Compliance and Arbitration Department. The name of a high-powered attorney was printed beneath it, along with a direct contact number. Jessica's stomach twisted. This was real. She had assumed the fallout would be bad, but not like this. Not lawsuits, not corporate legal teams getting involved, not evidence, witnesses, security footage. Naomi had made sure there was no escape. Jessica's entire life had been about control. Control over passengers, control over situations, control over how far she could push people before they snapped. But now she was the one trapped. Her breathing grew shallow as she looked up, her eyes scanning the dimming airport parking lot. The reality of what had happened, the sheer finality of it, pressed in on her like a vice. She had always thought she was untouchable. Now she wasn't just out of a job, she was on the verge of being ruined. Her feet felt heavy as she walked toward her car, her mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. Could she fight this? Was there still a way to talk herself out of it? Maybe if she could find the right words, the right excuse, maybe. She fumbled with her keys, unlocking the door and sliding into the driver's seat. The silence inside the car was deafening, the weight of the moment pressing down on her like a suffocating blanket. For the first time in her life, she had no plan. She had been so sure Naomi Carter was just another passenger, another person she could dismiss, undermine, humiliate. But Naomi wasn't just another passenger. Naomi had power, and she had used it in the most devastating way possible. Jessica closed her eyes, pressing her forehead against the steering wheel. She thought about all the moments she had brushed people aside, all the times she had made subtle digs at passengers who weren't the right kind for first class. She thought about how she had laughed when passengers walked away frustrated, how she had never been worried about complaints because they always got buried. But this time someone had decided not to let it go. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Jessica flinched, her heart racing. She grabbed it quickly, half expecting another message from Naomi or some unknown legal contact. Instead, it was from her sister, Ava. Ava, hey, saw something online. Call me when you can. Jessica frowned, confusion momentarily breaking through the haze of panic. Something online? Her fingers felt stiff as she opened her browser, her hands trembling as she typed into the search bar. Her breath caught in her throat. The first headline nearly made her heart stop. Flight attendant removed from duty after discrimination complaint by airline VIP. Jessica's hands turned to ice. She scrolled further. Lawyer exposes flight attendant's behavior on viral video. Exclusive footage. Passenger targeted by airline employee. Her vision blurred as she clicked on the video link. And there it was. The recording. David Monroe's video. The grainy footage showed the exact moment at the gate. Jessica holding Naomi's ticket longer than necessary. The hesitation, the smirk, the dismissive way she handed it back. And then came the audio. Are you sure this is your ticket? Jessica's own voice echoed back at her, clear as day. She felt sick. She had no idea how many people had already seen this. She backed out of the video, her panic spiraling. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the comments. Fire her. Classic example of someone thinking they can get away with it. Naomi Carter's a legend. She didn't even have to raise her voice. Make sure she never works in this industry again. Jessica's breath came in short, shallow gasps. She clicked on another link. A Twitter thread was exploding with comments, hashtags already trending. Justice for Naomi. Not true flight attendant fired. Charged accountability wins. Jessica let out a sharp breath, her whole body trembling. It wasn't just an airline matter anymore. It wasn't just a job loss. It was public. She was everywhere. The court of public opinion had already decided her fate. Her hands clawed at the door handle, suddenly desperate for air. She threw the door open and stumbled out, bending forward as nausea churned in her stomach. This couldn't be happening. She had thought losing her job was the worst part. She had thought the legal complaint was the worst part. But no, the worst part was realizing she would never escape this. No airline would hire her after this. No company would touch her. Her name was tainted. She had spent years making other people feel like they didn't belong. And now she was the one who was unwelcome everywhere. Jessica clutched her phone in a death grip, her breath coming out ragged. She could feel it happening. The walls closing in, her world shrinking, the weight of consequences finally crushing her. This wasn't just punishment. This was erasure. Naomi Carter hadn't yelled, hadn't threatened, hadn't begged for justice. She had simply let the world do it for her, and now no matter where Jessica went, no matter what she did, she would always be the flight attendant who got fired in front of everyone. Jessica sat slumped against the side of her car, her breath coming in shallow gasps as the weight of the moment settled over her like a crushing wave. The concrete beneath her felt cold, unyielding, just like the reality she now faced. There was no coming back from this. She stared blankly at the phone in her hands, the screen still glowing with the headlines that had already sealed her fate. The internet had made its judgment, and there was no appeal, no argument that could save her. Her name was everywhere now, attached to a scandal she had thought would be forgotten in a few days. But the world had changed. People had power now. The power to expose, to hold others accountable, to make sure someone like her never worked in the industry again. A fresh wave of nausea rolled over her as she scrolled further. News outlets had picked up the story. It wasn't just viral tweets and Reddit threads anymore. Major networks were reporting on it. She clicked on a news clip, her heartbeat hammering as the video loaded. A polished anchor with perfect hair and a serious expression looked directly into the camera. A flight attendant has been placed on indefinite leave after a now viral video captured what appears to be discriminatory behavior toward a first-class passenger, Naomi Carter, who, as it turns out, is not just a VIP traveler, but a major corporate partner with the airline. The footage has sparked widespread discussion about bias in customer service, and the airline has since released a statement confirming that an internal review is underway. Jessica's stomach dropped. They said her name. It wasn't just a faceless airline scandal anymore. She had a name now, a reputation, a scarlet letter pinned to her career. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled through the comments under the news post. Serves her right. How many times has she done this before and gotten away with it? I hope she never gets another customer service job again. She thought she was untouchable. Guess not. Jessica squeezed her eyes shut. She had always thought of herself as careful, smart enough to avoid trouble, subtle enough to never get caught. But Naomi Carter had never needed to argue with her. She had never needed to fight back. She had just sat there, quietly watching Jessica dig her own grave. And now the entire world was standing at the edge, throwing dirt on top of her. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She needed to respond. She needed to say something, anything to explain herself. Maybe if she apologized publicly. Maybe if she told her side of the story. Maybe if she... Her screen refreshed. A new post was at the top. Naomi Carter had spoken. Jessica's blood turned to ice. The post was simple. Just a single sentence, along with a link to the video that had destroyed her. Naomi Carter at Naomi Carter Official. The world is watching. The likes were skyrocketing. The comments were pouring in. Jessica's vision swam. She wasn't just a news story. She was now a symbol, a cautionary tale, the kind of person people would bring up in arguments for years to come. She could already picture it. Remember that flight attendant who got fired in front of everyone? You don't want to end up like Jessica Reed. Her name wasn't just trending. It was etched into history. Her hands shook as she clutched the phone, staring at Naomi's words. The world is watching. Jessica wasn't just fired. She wasn't just losing her career. She was losing her place in the world. No company would touch her now. No airline would risk the backlash of hiring the woman from the viral video. She would be blacklisted, erased. She had spent years making passengers like Naomi Carter feel small, feel powerless. Now Naomi had made her disappear. Jessica had nothing left. No plan, no job, no future. For the first time in her life, she felt the true weight of helplessness. She had mocked the wrong woman, and now the world had mocked her back. Forever. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Thanks for watching.